Well, tell me about the marina and you and Carl, and I mean, you built that block garage.
Built the cinder block garage, and that's where Carl, see, I was kind of leery about quitting my good job up in DC, making $37 a week, because I was about to starve to death trying to get this marina started. And of course, thanks to Mrs. Collins, she held a note on it. So in the meantime, a few years went by, and Carl was building one skiff after the other, and building up a big trade. Of course, I would come down on weekends and help me. I still have a job up there. And after about a year went by, 12 months, Carl says, you know, one thing, he says, oh, you better kill me. He said, I'm doing all the work, and you're supposed to be a partner. You don't show up only on weekends. And I said, well, you know, I've got a job too. I'm getting a little bit more money than you are. So anyway, it wasn't long after that I quit. Came down, helped him, and got him full-fledged. But then,
How old were you? What year do you think that was?
oh, that was 59. So I was born 31. I was 29. And on top of that, I got married that year too. So I had a full plate. So anyway, the next thing that happened was we wanted to get bigger and bigger, and we needed some bars, good big money which was big then at that time, to start this marina. And we had dedicated our lives to building this marina.
Right. Full time now.
Full time.
29 years old, married.
Yep.
Kids on the way.
Carl was, he was 7 years older than I was. He was married and working on his fourth kid, I think, at that time. So anyway, we did basket broom over Leonardtown. In fact, First National Bank, and Robert Blackston, one of your relatives, came into play because my dad knew him well from the hotel business he had up in around Union Station in D.C.
Yeah.
And
What hotel did he have anyway? Do you remember? Because I know he had one.
he had it was about 2 blocks from Union Station.
So it was down, it's down in right by Mass Ave and all that.
Right, just on the lower side, on the south side of Union Station, about 2 blocks down. So, what street is the Supreme Court on? I'm thinking it's on that same street.
Yeah, that's like on First Street or something.
Yeah.
First Street.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Southeast.
But anyway, so we went down there and talked to Mr. Broom, and
Was Captain Bob on the board back then?
oh yeah, that's
First
what I'll
National?
get to.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went to see Mr. Broom, and he hollered so loud when he opened the window you could hear it all the way to Kopal Point. So I called and I went over there to see him, and he said, "Well, how much money do you want?" And I said, "Well, how much can we get?" And he said, "I don't know. I got to come look and see what you got." So you get that old big Cadillac out, and he and his driver used to come down there about a week later down and look in their cinder block garage, and nothing else but payments. So he said, "Where's the chairs?" I said, "You're going to have to sit on this sawhorse if you want someplace to sit." So, and, of course, he took that sawhorse and sat on it there a little bit, and he looked around like this, and he says, "Well, I tell you the truth, I believe you boys are overextended already." I said, "Well, the only way you can get ahead is borrow a little money and work hard. And we're gonna try to do that, and we're gonna stay here till we either kills us or we're gonna make it." So he said, "I don't know. I'll have to think about this." He leaves here, and I said, "Call me in on this." I said, "Well, I can tell you that." So, but next move was we called Robert Blackston. Mr. Blackston, I want to talk to you. Okay, because he was a good friend of my father, a good friend of us, and we had, believe it or not, we had a fairly good reputation at that time. So anyway, went over to see Mr. Blackston. I said, you want to come down and look at what we got? And he said, yeah, I'll come down there. I haven't seen what you're doing. So we had a scale on Cole was pretty good at drawing plans, and so he drew kind of a rough scale of what we planned to do and build these docks and cover slopes and what have you. So Mr. Blacksmith said, we need some money, and Mr. Green don't act like he wants to lend us it, and you're on the board, and you know my dad well, and I said, you know, we want to really make a go of this thing. So he said, I'll tell you what to do. So next week I got a board meeting, and I'm going to tell Mr. Broom and the board that if you don't lend these boys this money, I'm going to lend it to them. And of course, the story was then, 2 days later, Mr. Broom calls me back, says, how much money do you want? I said, well, how much can I get? He said, well, tell me what you want to do, and then I'll tell you how much you can get. So we told him we're going to build docks and order lumber and machinery and stuff. And so he said, well, what other kind of business are you getting into till you get enough docks here? I said, well, right now we're building birdhouses for People's Drugstore. And he said, how many birdhouses you building? I said, well, last year we sold 10,000. And we were putting them together and hiring school kids to come after school for a nickel apiece. We had these jigs set up in 3 different stations, and all part of it was redwood lumber. Then we cut them all up in blocks, and we would sell these bird feeders and bird houses to People's Drugstore. And we sold 10,000, about 3 different years, we were over 10,000. So
You were doing manufacturing
that's right.
back then.
Back there, and that was the upstairs part of that big garage.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't know, but that's the only thing that saved us there for about 3 years.
That's crazy.
But anyway, we got back to Mr. Broom, and we said, can you lend us $25,000? And he said, well, let me think about that. So he says, called us up the next day. He said, do you want more than 25? I said, well, can we get 35? So we wound up borrowing 35,000. Mr. Broom said, Mr. Blackson says, you good to go? He said, he's on our board, and I'll take his word for it. So from that day on, it wasn't any trouble borrowing money, I can tell you that.
That's a good story. But who did all your piling work? How was that done back then?
Well,
You used pumps or you drive?
Let me start from scratch on that. We had this plan. Carl was drawing up all this plan, and we had to go get permits for everything. We had even back there then, and there was about an acre and a half of marsh grass. Today you can't even touch one blade of marsh grass because you go to jail if you do.
Right.
Well, back there then, you could get a permit in some cases and dredge it out. So we went over there started over with the Corps of Engineers, got a hold of them, and they came down and looked at it, and we went through the state of Maryland and the county, and it was the state, the federal, and the county to get these permits, and we got all the permits straight. And it was like a master plan. And of course it was going to be over a 10-year period or even longer. So here we are, got all this okay, got the approval and all, and money was getting to be another big issue. And next thing you know, we were going up the road. We knew Jimmy Bannigan and a lot of boys that I knew. Sonny Blackson, he worked with a telephone company. And next thing you know, we got a pretty good crew or an outlet to pick up these telephone poles for free.
Gotcha.
So we were using creosote telephone poles, which you could use legally then.
Right.
Can't use it today. So next thing you know, we had the first dock built, and next thing you know, we borrowed Herman Gass's seine boat. He hauled seine, he lived right next door.
Right.
We put a pump in there, and we put our own pilings down on the first dock with that seine boat, because it was a bad rig. So Carl says, this winter we're gonna build a pile driver.
You're gonna build a pile driver?
Built
Built your own pile driver?
Yeah, had our own. And this was 20 feet, 24 feet long and 12 feet wide. All built out of wood, built out of 2-inch planks, went up to the Ames mill and ordered our planks and got it down there. They didn't make any treatment then, except the next thing you knew, they had some kind of like kerosene and mix up and put in there, mix it with tar and color to it, and then you painted everything inside.
That's amazing.
Creosote. They called it creosote, but it was actually kerosene, coal oil. So anyway, then we got this first dock built, and then the next thing you knew, we were getting ready to build a seawall because we wanted to dredge that place out, and now we had our pile driver ready. Went up at an auction sale, and like Bobby and I had down here.
Right.
Bought a winch with a drop hammer, and next time we went up there, we built a pile driver and started doing this work, and of course I was full time, and that was like 8-10 hours every day.
So you were in your young 30s. You were in good shape.
Good shape.
And rolling.
And we got, after we built the pile driver, Carl went to an auction. Well, first of all, we went over there to see Mr. Broom again. Mr. Broom said, what do you want now? He said, we want to buy a crane. We're going to dredge our property out. We want to buy a crane with a drag line bucket on it. And of course, we had to explain to him what that was. So anyway, we went to talk to him. He said, we want a letter of credit. So he gave us a letter, and I think the letter said something like 15,000. So we were gaining momentum with the bank all the time. So, and Mr. Broom said, okay, you let me know as soon as you get back from the sale how much money you spent. So straight down. So Carl bought a crane up there. And next thing you know, we were in the dredging business. Next thing we bought was a tractor trailer, a dump truck, bulldozer, and we were in J.W. Russell worked for us then. He was a machinery operator. We went into the pond digging business.
Afterwards.
This was after we dredged there. Well, I don't know what I was doing when we dredged.
Let me stop you there. Where was your dredge lands? Where did you deposit your dredge material?
Well, that's going back to Robert Blackson again.
Oh.
We had, it was a small dump truck, it wasn't a 10-wheeler, just a small one. And every day we would dredge some material out, and he said, I'll make a deal with you. He says, I'll give you $1 a load, and you deliver it down to my waterfront property where he lived all these years.
Yeah.
By
the cottage, not by the big house.
No, it was by the big house.
Oh, by the big house.
So you see, he and General were partners.
Yeah.
On that, I think.
Right.
Anyway, we must have put, I'm gonna say 2,000, 3,000 loads. I don't know how many.
Oh man.
But $1 a load, we barely made gas.
This for the record.
Well, that's a good story too.
Well, I take you, I got a lot
So
of
River Springs had Cullen's Kopal land.
That's right.
So, I mean, that had to take you to build that. I mean, to dredge it. I mean, how long did it take
This
you?
is over a 10-year period
Oh,
before
okay.
we got enough. After the 10th year that I remember, I told Carl, I said, do you know if we could get 10 boats on this first dock we built, I think we could probably swing it without sweating and working 24 hours a day, it seemed like. So, sure enough, Mr. Nungesser came in. He was our first customer. He had a little little Owens cruiser at that time.
Yeah.
And he was in the, he made these fishing lures, sold them to the government. They were called 4-in-1 non-gasset trollers. And they had 2 little bolts in them, and he sold them to the government, so every soldier that went overseas had this fishing pack in it. Non-gasset 4-in-1 troller. And
So he was your first guy?
First guy, first customer.
But how did you ever meet him?
Well, he lived down there. He was a neighbor of ours down when my dad bought this cottage.
Oh, down on the point.
Right.
So we lived down at
So
Cole's Point.
and he worked up there on Northwest Washington, and his basement is where he built all his lures.
Oh, okay.
And I used to go up there and work with him up there. And of course, I knew him well, and then got into the lure business, but that was before we came down here. So. But anyway, he wanted to come up there and be our first customer, and I said, well, I think about this, wasn't too many years after that, General Hughes comes along, and he goes up there somewhere up in New York to the boat show and bought a Hubert Johnson little boat, little abstract boat, had a Chrysler Marine engine in it, and long story short, he kept it for the, in fact, the family still has it, and I think they put 5 or 6 engines in it and remodeled it. Carl built a hardtop cabin on that for him. So, got all that done.
So with those 2 influential people, you got a few more customers.
Oh yeah, well, one of our good customers was Webster Bell.
Right.
And he built the Bell of St. Mary's, which was a Chris Craft, and we went ahead and built a whole enclosure for that, which...
So in other words, you did your covered slip or an enclosure at your marina just for Webster's boat, Bell of St. Mary's.
Well, not exactly, but,
but you
see,
could,
he never did keep it over there full time, only when we worked on it.
yeah,
But he finally built his own.
over in Leonardtown Wharf.
Leonardtown, yeah. So,
But you all had a lot of people's boats that I remember, like
yes,
Frank Coombs'
we
boat.
had a good customer over there that you know well. His name was Walter Dorsey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he loved hanging out over there.
He had a
He'd like to get out on his boat for a few days.
That's right.
Several days.
That's right.
Well,
And
there's a
then
lot
one of
of,
our other good customers was Frank Coombs.
yes.
He had a boat over there, and
Frank's Folly.
Frank's father, and he was probably our best customer because he wasn't too organized when he got on that boat. So he had a little mahogany ladder that he hung over the side, and built out a good, nice mahogany, all varnished up, and so you could get onto the boat easier. Well, every day he took the boat out, he'd forget to take that off the boat, put it inside, because then by the time he got to the end of the slip, he'd hit the piling, and that would be gone. So that was, we used to make 2 or 3 at a time, so that. And then the next thing he did, when he came back in, he had to take his antenna down. Well, he forgot all about that every time. I mean, we had a stock of antennas. So between the ladders and the antennas, we were in commercial business for that one.
Well, Bobby, how many slips did you all end up having when you?
130.
130 slips. And you had probably at least 40 covered slips, didn't you?
No, we had more than that.
Had more than that?
We had about 50% of them were covered. So that would be 60,
Yeah,
65.
that's a lot. That's
Around 65. And some of these slips would hold a 50-foot boat.
Mhm. Oh, I know.
And that, of course, that was the thing that really helped us along. You know, everybody couldn't build a covered slip because we got the Amish to help us do that.
Yeah. Oh, they helped you do that?
We drove all the pilots, Carl and I, and then we hired these Amish to get up on the roof. They were like monkeys, and you know, sometimes they'd fall overboard, and 2 minutes time they were back up on the ladder and up on the roof. So.
Well, I know you all, you had the best slips on the Potomac, but you all did a lot of other things at the marina.
Well, we had docks from DC to Point Lookout.
Right.
And it really was a fabulous business because we couldn't keep up with it. Getting a shipwright, like Leonard Dingy was the old man at Call. I mean, he did his own way of building workboats, and he built several of those before we got a hold of it. But then Call converted Call was a good designer. Aggravating as hell sometimes, but he was a good designer. And he would draw plans of these boats and convert this workboat, which was a box stern, they called it then, into a box stern and a pleasure boat combination with the bottom design that was really like the big boats you see built down in North Carolina now. It became a big industry with people in the later years.
I've had Francis Guy right in that seat there, and he told me that he has built 183 boats, and he has a lot of admiration for you and Carl, and he, talks about, because I think he's probably right around your age, but
yeah, I know Francis well. In fact, he used to come over there and buy lumber from us. We probably had as good a supply of boat lumber than anybody had in the county. And one thing, I had a lot of good business people that owned boats that would drive, hell of a long distance to get over there because we had every damn size bolt and screw and everything you could do at your fingertips, where nobody else carried that kind of stuff. You didn't, number one, they didn't need it, and of course we had got the reputation of doing all this woodwork. Then we started building boats, and we built, the biggest boat we built was the one we sold to Jane gave us. Anyway, she's about 95 years old. But the Sales Good, do you remember that name?
Yes, yeah.
She married the Sales Good, and he ordered this boat from us. And it took us about 4 years to build this boat. It was 44 foot, twin diesel, flying bridge, and the whole 9 yards. That was a beautiful boat. And then that's when fiberglass came about. We built it out of white cedar, and then you fiberglass over that.
Yeah. Well, my father, he used to tell me these stories of a Kopal skiff, and you need the white cedar, and you got to have it, and you got to put it in the water for a little bit, and then let it swell, and then you got to do this and that. And
well, see, that was the good part about white cedar. When you build them out of pine or any other material, you'd have to keep a 10-penny nail as a gauge. You'd stick that 10-penny nail down in between the planks so that you know it's going to swell 1/8 of an inch.
Right. And
whereas cedar, when you build a cedar boat, you jam that tight together because it didn't swell that much. But I'll tell you one thing, I was a city boy, so to speak, but when I got through with that marina business,
I bet you
I was happy, and I loved doing it. Carl loved doing it. We got along. We fight once in a while, but not all the time.
How many years did you all?
38 years.
38 years.
Yeah.
Well, that was a love of your life.
Yeah.
And I remember when you sold it, and I remember when you did sold it. So after that, was it after that you filled your days with hanging out on the island, or was that before that?
No,
Tell me how that all came about.
Well, of course, when I was starting this marina business, we had decided we're going to put our heart and soul in it. Next thing you know, I became president of the Marine Trades Association, and that was all the marinas in Washington, Maryland, everybody that we could get to join, and we had probably about 50 marinas in there
Right.
when we first started. I wasn't the first president, but I had, and that was another interesting thing that really we learned a lot about the boat business.
And the power of the association, because
right. What you could do with
people doing all different type of things, you know, and you learn from them.
So we did, as we went along, we did that. And of course, I didn't really get involved in the island. Well, I guess I did before I retired, but I was in the Marine Trade Association, and then I was in the island, St. Clements 100 outfit, and I was one of the instigators of that, Dick Gas, and
Yes.
that all came about, and of course, then in 1989, about 26 years ago, we sold the marina for the first time to Hugo D. Caceres.
I remember the whole transaction.
Yeah, I do too. So anyway, after that, we went to, I retired and said, my dream was to, if I ever got retired from the boat business, I want to devote my time to St. Clements Island, Blackstone Island. And of course, Dick Gas, met up with him, and he says, well, the first part of my story, I'll go back a little bit further than that, was Bo Bailey and Jimmy Bannigan and Russ and all of them, and regular drinking buddies. They came down to my house one day and says, we're going down to Butterfield's property. We're going to buy it and build a museum. I said, you all been drinking early today, haven't you? You don't know what the hell you're talking about. So we went down to the museum, wound up to be about 15. Bo opened the trunk of the car up. That was full of VO and beer and anything you wanted. He said, well, here's the story. We think we ought to get a thing going here with the state, build a museum there. And this property is for sale because it's John Butterfield's property. And I said, well, as long as I don't have to put up no cash, I'll help you out. So next thing you know, sure enough came back, and that's been there for 35 years, I guess now.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that house, you know, growing up, the Butterfield house, you know. But now let me ask you this. I didn't realize that exact story. But the government pier, well, why was that ever put there where it was? Because he was the caretaker back in his day? Or?
Well, see, it was World War II when that pier was built.
Okay.
And John Butterfield had been working for the Navy on the island they hired him because he lived on the island at one time, and he got in touch with the people at Dalvern who purchased the island. The government purchased the island, and then they wanted him because he had a good-sized boat that he had built himself, something like 36-foot cabin cruiser, and he was going back and forth in that when he worked over on the island, you know, after he moved over on this side. So anyway, the Navy hired him, and then they came down to build the pier on the island. That was an old rickety pier that was ready to fall down, and they built this big pier they got over there now. It's heavy pilings and planks, and that was to put this Navy barge down there with anti-aircraft guns on it that would tow behind a plane and shoot from that barge, practice, target practice. So that's how John Butterfield got over on the island, and of course then he had to have a pier to bring all this equipment and stuff down, and all on his boat that they could bring down. And so they built a pier there, and then built a pier over on St. Clements Island also. Built that one first.
Yeah. See, I never realized but I mean, you look at the size of the pier and the structure, you know it was for an industrial use,
right.
you know, a heavy duty use, you know.
Well, they used to sell oysters on that pier too at one time. I don't remember what years that was, but it was.
So that's how, your buddies came by and picked you up and said, this is what we're gonna do.
We're gonna build this.
Bo, Russ, Jimmy,
Jimmy and
Dick,
Gas.
and then you got it rolling.
Well, we went up to the legislature. Johnny Wood helped us out, and next thing you know, we had Elmer Bailey built that building. Do you remember him?
Yeah, I do.
Elmer Bailey was a good carpenter. We were very well known. And James Hall too was a good one. Anyway, they came, we got started on that building after it was approved, legislature. Next thing I know, they wanted to start, I had gotten this job on the island, because what happened, the first blessing of the fleet was, it'll be 50 years ago, 2 years from now, the 50th anniversary. And we, the person that was manager, want to look at State Park, he was the manager of all the parks in St. Mary's County. He called me one day and he says, he said, somebody gave me your name, and he says, you've been going over to the island, and well, I said, the Optimist Club had started a fundraiser over there. Of course, they got permission to do it. They're going to do the Blessing of the Fleet on St. Clement's Island. And so he said, well, here's my problem. He said, we don't have too much help. And he says, we want somebody to keep the boat over in your neighborhood and run our crew over there to cut the grass. We'll get over there about 9:30 in the morning, and we'll leave about 2:30, and you got to take us over and pick them up, pick the boys up. I said, well, what's in it for me? Well, you're a volunteer, aren't you? We want you to volunteer. So I said, yeah, but I'm kind of run out of time. I don't have all that time. And I said, well, let me think about this thing a little bit. So I called him back. His name was Keith Farrar, and he was in charge and I think he was a lieutenant or something. But anyway, he called him back, and I said, I got thinking about this thing. I'm getting ready to retire from the marina, and we got to sell it. And how much you gonna pay me if I take the job, go over there and cut the grass for you? He said, well, now you're talking good. He said, that's what we were after to start with. So sure enough, they started me out at $5.25 an hour. Of course, they brought me a boat to use, brought me all the equipment, and at that time I had a lawnmower that had a 24-inch blade cut on it. So it was like, we only cut about an acre at that time. So anyway, I started doing that 26 years ago. And,
Oh my goodness.
and I didn't get rich, so to speak, on that.
Oh my goodness.
So when I finally quit last year, I was up to $10.25 an hour. But anyway, it was the thing that I wanted to do when I retired. I told Roger and John Butterfield, because Roger and I killed a lot of ducks on that island years ago, and had a lot of fun over there. We used to go in when John Butterfield had planted watermelons. We'd steal watermelon every now and then and bring it home.
Well, you've seen a lot over there, that's for sure. Since you,
yes. Anyway, then, as years went by, we started St. Clement's 100 because Dick Gass had got the idea that we needed to raise some funds to keep up the island, as well as the state wasn't going to do anything. They had one little grass plot around the across, and that's all they've cut, or keeping it up, you know.
Right.
Because when I started working over there, they didn't want me to do but so much, because they didn't want to pay me that $5.25 an hour, you know. They wanted me to keep it down as low as I could get it in hours. So I said, well, every day I inch up a little more, and keep cutting more and more, and I got up to about 10 acres.
Well, whatever you started, you know, from a quarter acre to 10 acres, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
I've got a lot of compliments on it. I did it not for the money, of course, but I just wanted to do that for my days. I live right there, close by. It takes me 10 minutes. In fact, I got a piece of literature I want to leave with you from a newspaper article that Kopal's driving his boat to work in the morning and coming home in the evening, and he might meet one boat on his venture. And,
Well, Bobby, I don't know what to say. I really appreciate you coming over. I want to talk some more, and we're going to do it some more. But I just wanted to get you first by yourself, and then I'd like to get maybe you and Jimmy, and I might even bring old Francis up here and just talk some stories, you know, have a little round table.
yeah.
But, you know, we didn't even talk about St. Patrick's Creek much. And, you know, what's interesting to me is that, you know, all the activity along the roadside, but there was also so much activity on the water's edge. And there was a lot happening back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, you know.
Well, there wasn't any end to what we could do if we wanted. If we could have borrowed a lot of money and just got somebody to help us build it, but we didn't want to do that. We want to be hands-on, call and do it our way.
Well, what you left behind is just awesome. And the current people, I've been over myself, I just speak for myself. They're really running a very nice shop over there, and I think it's a good tribute to what you started, and they really...
Well, they blame me for they getting involved in that, because it came to my house before they bought it and said, we just want to talk to you. We're thinking about buying this Kopal marina. And I said, well, if you want to work hard, it can be done. It's a lot of work involved, and I said, if you like what you're doing, you want to do it, you can make some money. But it's not easy.
No.
Of course, they blame me for getting them involved in that, telling them that story, that they were going to be able to make a living anyway.
Well, I really appreciate it, Bobby. I appreciate you coming over. I'm going back to work now. And James, we're going to cut.